Your hosts are Jared and Jason, and this is the After Party. The crown winner of last week is White Student Transmission, financially gifting $15. Thank you so much, brother. We deeply appreciate it. Congratulations. Second place was a three-way tie, all gifting $10 were Tall Kevin, JK160, and Johnny Appleseed. Thank you all so very much. Congratulations. And folks, you can financially gift on Entropy, which will be up in a moment, where you can also watch the stream and ask and vote on questions there as well, of course. And you may also financially gift on Cash App. The URLs for both are in the description below. Jared and I evenly share the financial gifts with our guests here on the After Party. Today we have the one and only, folks, a big favorite in the White Wellbeing community, a big achiever, Mr. V on tap. Mr. V, please introduce yourself to the esteemed community. Tell them where they can find you, and Mr. George will take us into the conversation, brother.
Thank you, gentlemen, and good evening. It's great to be here. Well, I'm primarily active in the Going Free community. I recall starting out even before Go Free, the first edition, came out. I would listen to Mr. Köhne's episodes, always looking for, what was going on. It was very different back then with, the so-called alt-right and movements like that. And there was always this very false idea, very dominant in the anti-white narrative, that to be a white advocate means that you look like this, you advocate for a specific political ideology. But then when I heard Mr. Köhne, I thought, finally, someone who is professional, someone who is intelligent and who breaks that false narrative, that false paradigm. I'm also active in other areas, still interacting with people in the white sympathetic sphere, trying to reach them with Go Free. And I'm very proud that we're seeing some changes. People are moving in our direction rather than us being dragged back down in less than productive directions.
Well, welcome to the After Party. Anyone listening who also tunes into Going Free, which I'm sure you all do on Sundays, might recognize Mr. V from several of his appearances there. And he has spoken about the very exciting news of the Going Free clubs and an initiative that he is starting in his native Canada. But keep that on the back burner. We're definitely going to get to that. But of course, as you know, when someone's on the After Party, especially when it's their first time, we like to give them the floor, hear their story, give them the time to really paint a picture. And so we're going to do that now. So I was interested to hear what you said about the online scene. And I was thinking about this recently too, about how many things have changed, the different kind of ideas out there or trends and creators that are popular that ebb and flow, come and go, just in the few years that I have been doing it myself. So I'm curious about that as well, but why don't we just go back to the beginning and whatever you feel comfortable with or appropriate with. We want to hear about how you got here, but anything that you'd like to say about your upbringing, and if you were aware of some of the things even then at a young age that led you to the advocacy work you do now, or were you perhaps in the anti-white narrative and took on the meme pathogens? I mean, they're all there, and we're all affected by them subconsciously to some degree, of course. But again, Mr. V, welcome. And what can you tell us about going back to when you weren't a Mr. V, maybe when you were a little V?
Well, I think the most important part of that, because I am in Canada now, I'm in the province of Ontario, is knowing that I did not start out here. I am actually, I will not say immigrant, because thanks to Mr. Köhne, I no longer feel like that. I very much feel at home in a way that I didn't feel before. So I grew up in Portugal, and then I came over to Canada when I was around 13 years old. So I am of Iberian descent. And starting out, growing up, working class family, my dad built his house himself. It was him, my mother, and a friend that he contracted. And he built his home there, had me and my brother. We're, 10 years apart. So as you can imagine, growing up with an older brother 10 years apart, I was 6, he was 16, he's 26, I'm, 16. We did our fair share of fighting, but it was a rather traditional upbringing. As far as being racially conscious, that was always implicitly in the background. I was aware of racial differences, but discourse on race, none of that is really mainstream in Portugal. It does not even Portugal doesn't even have a law of blood, if you will. Unfortunately, there's also a lot of anti-white MPs, a lot of anti-whiteism that came from Salazar's time. Of course, he is painted as a with typical anti-white slurs, but that whole regime was not white positive in any way, not by any stretch of the imagination.
If I could stop you for a second, I find that noteworthy, your heritage there, and I wasn't aware of that. What is the angle that they take in Portugal and Spain? Because here in America, you know what all the moves are with the Amerindians and stolen land and all that. We've talked about that even recently. I think Jason, a couple of episodes ago, it came up. You're talking about on the Iberian Peninsula. If you go, depending on how far back people like to talk about it, you're talking about places that were occupied by Ottomans, Muslims from North Africa, the Middle East, for centuries. What is the narrative there? How do they justify it there that the European white man is evil in the Iberian Peninsula and your native Portugal?
The way they do it is, as is often done in also Spain and France and other countries that were, colonial powers. That is how they approach it. Is colonialism is bad, and Portugal specifically. I don't know if it was the same for Spain, but there was a very dangerous anti-white narrative that was used for colonial purposes, which was to say, well, we have a right to engage in this colonial activity because we have some of your blood, insert X group, that we want to colonize. So that was a very dangerous anti-white narrative put out by the state. Not that the state believes it, not that there's any indication of that, but that was a justification at the time for colonial purposes. So the idea, what politicians say is, well, you don't have a right to advocate for indigenous Iberians, which are members of Western kind, which are Europeans. You don't have a right to that because you are mixed, is essentially what they say.
All right, yeah. So so they're trying to use these two prongs, and obviously they overlap, of the fact that Portuguese were, obviously on the Atlantic coast, sailed out, a lot of activity, the colonialism narrative, but then there's the mixed narrative as well. This is something I'm not aware of. Is there any kind of, like France has with its African areas, or England with the Windrush thing and how people from the Caribbean were encouraged to come over to England and the UK starting in the 40s and 50s? Is there any kind of reverse now flow of peoples from Brazil, of course, being the main Portuguese stronghold in the New World? Or like, what's the relationship like between Portugal and Brazil? Do you have people from Brazil who now are coming back over to Portugal?
It's a constant influx. Of course, an influx of white erasure. The government is in no way white positive, so it's not saying, hey, those who are descended from Iberians and they can prove that they are, or even, half Portuguese, half German, half Portuguese, half Italian, because those other European populations are also in Brazil.
Sure.
it's none of that. It's Brazilians, peoples of mixed race heritage, non-Europeans, people who are not members of Western kind. It is a constant influx. And it's the same thing from the colonies. It's the same thing as is happening in France. It's members of the colonies. It's people that we gave our language to, foolishly, I would say, that we gave our language to, that are now moving in and carrying out that process of white erasure, as well as, of course, as Muslims and other populations that have been there for a long time. Some gypsies, some Sephardic Jewish people, etc.
That's
Yeah.
interesting. I didn't know that about the Brazilian backflow. You hear about it a lot with France, with the African areas, as I said, and UK with the Caribbean, but I was not aware of that with Brazil. But it's the same thing everywhere, which just goes to show it can't be a coincidence, But so what was it? All right, what was it like? You may know if you've listened to the show. I am always keen to ask, especially when someone has traveled a lot or they've moved from one Western country to another. What did you note were the differences when you were growing up in more Anglo Ontario, but also the overarching umbrella similarities that you could go across an ocean and be in this Western culture and see, oh, wow, there's still a lot, maybe some people take for granted. I think a lot of people still, it's that water to a fish element. You don't realize what you have till it's gone sort of thing. That's what people are playing with right now. They're playing with fire. But what did you see as the similarities and differences when you moved and then had your teenage years in this very different but still Western culture in Ontario, Canada?
I'll start with the differences because, unfortunately, as far as similarities go, I'm in a city. It is what I call a multiracial zone. I would not call this a society. I think it doesn't deserve that title. It is
As soon as I finish my question, I realized, depending on where you are in Canada, your experience might not even be that you were in a Western, way of being, way of living. If you're in a city, so okay, I follow.
Yeah. All that being said, of course, although because it's such a wide erased city, there's less, of our biospirit being displayed. There's less of our culture, but there are still some similarities, of course. But I'll start with the differences because they were so stark. It really shook me. So coming over when I was 13, of course, over there we get lessons in English and in French. Although I did well in French, I've always preferred English, and the culture there is saturated with American media, which is of course anti-white. So you grow up watching, all the same movies. You play the video games, the shows. Of course, we have, every awful show that America has is there, just in a different language. Same exact thing. So because of that, I already spoke some English, but of course there was still that, that anxiety and that kind of a fear, because it was such a different environment. I went from being in a village of about, I think at the time, 2,000 people, majority older folk, and having to, catch a bus at 6:30 a.m. to go to the city so I could be in school until like 5 p.m. I went from that to moving to a multiracial city with nobody, having to start over, make new friends, etc. And of course, the biggest difference was from ethnic homogeneity. Although there's already some white erasure even in that village, we would get a lot of, some influx of non-Europeans, some migrants, even people from, Eastern Europe, which is, I'm totally fine with that. but it went from ethnic homogeneity to a multiracial environment. So now I have the words to describe that. It was a shock. It was biospiritual disharmony. I stayed indoors a lot of the time. I became very secluded. And then, funnily enough, when you become racially conscious, you realize, oh, wow, all of my friends that I made were all Iberians. So it was very funny. So
Wow.
it ended up like that. All the friends that I made were other Iberians, and all the best people that I got along with, if they were not Iberians, they were Europeans. But the shock was seeing, wow, every race is here, every single race. There's so many ethnicities. There's Chinatown, Koreatown. Of course, there's our people. There's Little Italy, Little Portugal, even some, even the Anglos are still here, but their presence has been very much erased, unfortunately. But the differences were in seeing that it's a city of millions. It's a multiracial environment. You're going to school with non-Europeans, and also the anti-whiteism is very explicit here, shall we say. It's very different than over there.
Just speaking to someone in the chat, answering a question for a moment. So, what was it? Simply the force of going to public school, and maybe similar situations to what Jason writes about in Crucible, his book, that woke you up and set you on this path? Or were there anything else that you'd like to point out that were key moments, pivotal moments that formed who you are, and the fact that you want to step out and do the kind of advocacy that you're doing?
Yeah, at this time, I think it was all kind of, cooking in the background. I think all the ingredients were kind of being added. So the other thing, of course, was that biospiritual disharmony. It was also noticing that because it's a multiracial area, there is no dominant culture. I did not feel at home, and there was always this sense of unease. And also wondering, where is Canadian identity? That was also a big shock. Where is Canadian identity? How come I can't talk to Canadians? How come I can't meet any proud Canadians? There was this constant messaging of, there is no Canadian, but of course the so-called First Nations, which I definitely take that as an MP.
Yeah.
So that was the other thing. Why is it like this vacant zone, this empty gap? And I think other people noticed that too. I had a friend of mine who was from the north of Portugal, and he went back. He couldn't take it. He did not enjoy it here. He wanted to be among his people. He wanted to be among his own culture. He wanted to see, the reflection of his biospirit. Whereas here, you're always wondering, like, is this really Canada? Am I really in another country? Where am I? You do not meet proud Canadians. People here are very white guilted. And of course, like I mentioned, the anti-whiteism is more explicit. So here you start to become aware of certain MPs. All kinds of MPs, but one that I really recall was about the racism concept, that anti-white concept, which was the conclusions that it leads down. Such as the fact that eventually the only race you can make fun of is the white race. The only race that can't have a homeland or advocate for itself is the white race. You cannot say that only Western kind are Canadians, etc. It was just I might not be explaining it too well, but it's the vacancy. It's the absence of substance, as Mr. Köhne writes in Prometheus Rising, and it's like that, but for our people. You just do not meet a real Canadian. It's only recently that I've been in contact with real Canadians who And I say real as in proud Canadians, people who are on our side. Everyone else, they just assume that a Canadian is anyone and anything. You go somewhere and you see the most ridiculous thing talking about how there's no official language of Canada. All kinds of stuff, that anything can be spoken, anyone can be Canadian, etc., etc. So it was going from a country that still has some sort of implicit nationalism and ethnic homogeneity to an area of this country that is becoming more and more white erased. And then, little things start to come up, like I remember the neighborhood, someone was moving and they were putting out magazines, and I pick up a magazine and it says, well, whites are a minority in the city that I'm in, and the future is mixed race. And I remember that in school, now that I think about it. A picture of a mixed race woman and talking about how the future is mixed race. No one will have a race. All these kinds of little things that keep coming up and keep kind of raising your racial consciousness. The immune system starts to kick in.
Yeah, that it's incredible to hear about what you're describing as this black hole of any kind of positive Canadian identity. You come from Portugal, and as you said, you're assuming that even though there's anti-Whiteism that's going on there, you go to Canada. Okay, I'm moving to a new country. It'd be reasonable to assume that you're going to meet people who are Canadian. Hey, we're Canadian means something to be Canadian, and to have this society where it's anathema to even suggest that there's any kind of positive identity, that there's something where it means to be Canadian. How does it contrast with what you remember of Portugal? And I should tack on, do you travel back to Portugal? Have you traveled back as an adult to see friends and family? If so, this might inform the answer, round it out a little better to what I'm asking, which is, what is Portuguese identity? And I know that's always, even though it's at the heart of what we talk about here, that kind of question, I know it's tough too, because the thing is, a lot of elements of identity are, as you said, implicit. And throughout a lot of history, people don't have to. It's like you wake up every day and you read a checklist that you wrote on like a whiteboard in your bedroom. Like, yeah, I'm going to remember the 15 things of what it means to be Portuguese. It's just woven into all of the assumptions and all the things that you're comfortable with and all the ways people interact. As I said before, the water to a fish, that whole thing, that whole image. But if you can speak to it, is there anything you can identify of what makes Portugal, how people still understand their Portuguese identity? Of course, understanding the fact that, like any countries are big places. There's different regions. There's, even within a country, there's different breakdowns of threads of the subcultures and regions they're in. But do you have anything to say to that?
Certainly. I'll quickly speak to what you mentioned first. What you said, and you're totally spot on. You moved to a different country, and I also recall at the time, because my father came here before, and I stayed back home with my mother, and I remember being told, well, there's everyone of every race there. And I found that very strange. But yes, you move to another country, and those were my exact thoughts, was I'm going to experience, something Canadian. I'm going to talk to Canadians. There's going to be some sort of culture there. And to this day, I sadly have to say, I have not experienced true Canadian culture. I
Yeah, they've
simply
taken
have
on
not.
totally the passport paperwork kind of citizenship that I guess goes back to the French Revolution, right? I mean, that a big part of that is going on still in France, and they're dealing with the fallout of that line of thinking as well.
Yeah, it's almost, Canada as mommy of the world. We're supposed to take everyone in. We're a country of peace. We can't ever be assertive. Can't be, it's can't be proud, and if you are proud, you're proud in the diversity, which is just code for white erasure. That's all that it is, unfortunately. Yeah, you expect that there's going to be some substance there, but unfortunately there is not. And it's one of the fastest changing countries demographically, second largest country in the world. I understand, same thing as America. There's a big problem in identity formation when it's such a large country. And to now kind of connect that to Portugal, Portugal has the other issue. The other issue being it's such a small country that I would say, I'm going to only speak for people who actually understand Iberian heritage. I'm not going to talk about the people who have this vague sense of national pride or national identity and this kind of flag waving stuff. I'm going to talk about people who actually understand what it is to be Iberian. For us, it's our little home. It's our little corner of the world. It's the only place that we have. It's such a small country. It's so quaint. There's a very cozy feeling there. It's working class people. Aside from, you've got places like Lisbon, Porto, you've got the, Coimbra with the heritage related to universities and scholarship, etc. You've got, the more southern places of the country where the English and the French like to go to catch some sun. We catch a lot of sunlight there. I think it's the one place in Europe where you catch the most sunlight. But the way we look at it, it's our little quaint home. And to be Iberian really is to be part of a people that have struggled to not be white erased. That would be the simplest way that I can put it. The people who struggle to not be white erased and still have some scars from it. Because there are members of Western kind. It is a country of Western kind, but there are also some people who are not members of Western kind, who are remnants of previous invasions, shall we put it that way. So to be Iberian really is to struggle against white erasure, to have gone through all of these conflicts, to be part of such a small ethnic group, yet have traveled and gone all over the world. It's wanting to be navigators and always in combat. That's the other thing too. We're always a minority against our larger force. So having to untangle these messes and untangle these situations and be kind of proud to pull ourselves out of these messes. And at the same time, having a certain sense of hospitality.
What is the general feeling then? Again, I know you don't live there now, but if you have any ties there, speak to people there, go back, that it's a small place and there's always been kind of a minority against other larger forces, even within the European story. How do Portuguese people, not the government, not the official propaganda, but how do a lot of the Portuguese people themselves see Portugal vis-a-vis the European Union, the power centers in France and Germany in the European Union project, and all of its this march towards this, as you said, it basically wants to do to Europe what you're talking about is going on in Canada, is make it this zone, this economic zone, this melting pot where there's no real culture.
Yeah, it's the anti-European Union.
Yes,
That's
indeed.
really what it is. Yeah. And I should be able to do a better job to describe, what it means like to be Portuguese, but in a way, I believe it is an identity whose time to die has come. And I mean to die not in a sense of biological white erasure. I mean in the sense of so something new can be born out of it. I think it has to be reshaped and reformed because there's so many anti-white narratives and so much baggage. It's also old and, dare I say, crippled, really, by the weight of the past. I believe that because the country is small, because of the size of the population, a new kind of identity could be born very easily. A very white positive identity, um, an Iberian positive identity that has good ties with Spain and puts behind this nonsense of brothers' wars, because as everyone knows, Portugal and Spain have been going at each other, which is it's as dumb as the English versus the Irish. It's just this anti-white brothers' war that has to go. So I should be able to do a better job to describe it. There's so much that goes into it. It's like you said, Jared. I don't have a checklist of things of what it means, but
Yeah, man.
yeah, but
You know it when you know it when you're there. That's the thing. That's the thing that can be devilishly tricky is, and I think that's part of the bigger picture story is we're going through an era when we're still in the throes. You know, we were born into this, but in terms of human history, it's a relatively short amount of time when you think about it that the world has been this connected. That you could get on a plane 6 hours and be in a completely different part of the world, completely different language, completely different culture, to say nothing of now turning on the internet and speaking to people from all around the world or getting news from people all around the world. And that news is, of course, not just objective. It's all weaponized, it's all propagandized. Uh, Even in softer, more subtle ways, there's only so many things you could put your attention on. We're asked to care about if if there's an earthquake in Asia, you're all of a sudden asked to care about that and donate to some charity that's going over there to help with that. And I'm not saying that there's never a time and a place for something like that. I'm not disparaging that in general in a different world, but obviously our house is on fire and the vast majority of our time and resources needs to be there. But for 99.9% of human history, your ancestors in these villages in Portugal would not have known what was likely going on a few villages away, let alone a tsunami in Japan or something like that. So we're still getting used to, we're still in the throes of these growing pains of dealing with this different modality of being this interconnected. So I think that there would be interesting growing pains around that, even if it weren't for the contrived, purposeful anti-white narrative. But the anti-white narrative and all the anti-white forces and the different virtue signaling that entraps people into that funnel that brings them into anti-whiteism obviously exacerbates that 1,000-fold. But having said that, before we get to the groups, the Going Free clubs, anything else that you feel is important for people to hear about, just bringing us more up to speed in your present life? Because you've given us a lot of interesting comparisons with Portugal and Canada and your time when you first moved there, the observations you made. Again, you said you moved there as a teenager, but anything just maybe news of the world or events that inspire you, brought you to where you are right now, before we move on to other topics?
sure, I'll quickly get to your questions that I didn't answer yet. As far as similarities
Mm,
between the two, when I do talk to actual Canadians, um, it's the same hospitality that you would expect. Of course, the same cleanliness, the same love of order, um, the same kindness as well. Of course, architecture similar as well in the old parts of the city where I'm at. It's um, the same architecture. Um,
have you been down to the States?
no, unfortunately, I have not. I might have been. I think I've been to the States, but only, if I recall correctly, was an airport. This was years ago, so not really,
Mm,
outside
mm.
to sightsee or anything like that. Closest I've been to the States was Niagara Falls.
Yes, beautiful place. But all right, so you haven't spent much time in the States. Got it.
Yeah. One, if I may, one similarity that I find interesting. There's many that you could draw, of course, but one similarity that I find, and I was talking about this with someone recently, was you guys have cowboys, we have bullfighting, and it's the same. It's the same biospirit there. The challenge of taming a bull, or being a cowboy, that's the same thrill that we get seeing a man atop a horse, and that beautiful connection that knight and horse have when they dodge the bull's attacks, and to look at the horse and to see the joy and the thrill that it gets in its ability to dodge the bull's attacks and face the bull where he would not be able to do so by himself is very beautiful. And the crowd cheering is just very exhilarating, and sometimes the horses even dance. It's just beautiful. I think it speaks to something very beautiful about our biospirit, which is our ability to interact and communicate with animals, and really kind of bridge the gap between those two worlds. Of course, you know, domesticating wolves, having dogs, the great relationship that we have with dogs, our great relationship with bees, that's rarely mentioned, but also with horses. And you guys have cowboys, and kind of still wanting to tame the wild and interact with the wild in this kind of spectacle, this kind of ritual. So your rodeos and your bull riders is kind of the same thing that we have with our bullfights, and of course our bull grabs, where a man will go out, put his hands on his hips, summon a bull to come toward him with a bunch of other men behind him, so that he can then grab the bull's horns and kind of do a successful bull grab, stopping the bull. And then, eventually one guy, the guy who's last at the back, will go around, grab the bull's tail, and the bull will try to get at him. So the bull is just spinning around like a dog trying to chase his own tail. Very funny stuff. But yeah, you see little things like that.
Right. No, I follow. I get what
know,
you're saying.
Yeah. The other thing was how the Portuguese see the European Union. Well, when the euro came out, people saw that as kind of destroying their economy. People saw that as, okay, it might be good, but we might also get sucked into this bigger organism. And what people think right now, I'm not too sure. But at the time, a lot of people didn't like it. For economic reasons, but they also saw a potential benefit in it. I think at the time when the European Union was when Portugal was becoming more a part of the European Union, no one saw what it was going to become. No one saw that it was going to steal our sovereignty, in the way that it has.
Right. It's always pitched as something convenient. I mean, again, to go back to what I said a moment ago, in a world of hyperconnectivity and faster travel, on the one hand, you're like, okay, you don't want to be delayed at every single European border if you're traveling around Europe often. It's pitched as conveniences, and if that's really what it was, that's fine. That's one thing. We can't have old archaic ways of doing things tie up business and travel and trade now, but that obviously isn't what it is. Just like none of it is what it is. Just like what you said with multiracialism, when you saw that said you were in high school and you saw this magazine speaking about that. True diversity, not the weaponized term as it's used, but when we take back that word and how we would understand it, is a principle of life. You can't squash a principle of life. It's just going to reassert itself elsewhere. So I don't think, I mean, maybe the middle management lackeys actually believe in some kind of utopian vision of this. I don't think the people who are really implementing this even believe this and have this ideal. But even if you follow the line of thinking of, if we all mix, then we won't recognize differences. It will stop wars and hatred and things like that. It's not true, because the mixed people in Australia will still create some kind of a different culture than the mixed people in Japan versus the mixed people in Canada. And that's not to say that I see the world only in conflict terms and they're all going to be at each other's throats. You could put it in a very positive way that it's just, again, like the different flowers, the different varieties of trees, they'll form their own ways of being, and there'll be some kind of differences there. There's never going to be this, from this kind of biological material perspective, we're never going to arrive at a place where it's like everyone's the same, so I don't recognize any differences. The whole rub of human life is to balance that idea of the many and the one. Same thing even within your own family. You're an individual, but you're a member of the family. This is what I've always said. This is what began me on my journey, is just seeing these lies or these half-truths. It's a shell game. You're getting one side of the story. It's propagandized. It's a narrative. And then I began to ask why. There must be an agenda here, because what they're saying it's not true. It's not true on any level. You could look at it in spiritual terms. You could look at it in hard-nosed engineering, biological terms. It doesn't matter if you have a more scientific mind, a more poetic mind. It just doesn't ring true. It's just not true on any level. And then you begin to ask, well, why are we being sold these lies? What's the agenda behind it? And then we arrive at where we are. So here we all are doing this work together, and we're glad you're here. So maybe that is a good segue to say, this community here, we all know what it's about. We all know what Jason has spearheaded. He'll always give credit to the community. But of course, my friend Jason here has spent his life devoted to this and testing different things and helping people undo those meme pathogens that you talked about. And people need the community, and they need activity to go forward and feel like they're doing something. Enter Going Free clubs. So again, we know this has been talked about on the Going Free stream Jason does on Sunday, but why don't you tell people, because this still might be new to certain listeners, of what you're doing in your area with Going Free clubs, and Jason can chime in about how this is a going thing, and it's growing into something here.
Yeah, and what you spoke about, I think, gets at one of the core forces that really wake a lot of our people up, which is seeing how out of line with natural laws our world is. And that was a big thing for me. That and the invasion of Europe. I would say those were the two biggest things. I have no shame in saying that I cried when I thought about the possibility of our people going extinct and all the suffering that we're undergoing, all the white erasure, many times, and then the desperation of what are we going to do, and specifically for Iberians, I even thought, oh well, we're just going to go extinct, and eventually, well, at least I can take some solace in the fact that maybe the English or someone, maybe the Americans, someone will take over Iberia. So long as the Iberian Peninsula is still European, that's okay with me. Then, of course, Going Free changed all of that, and I saw, all right, we're not doomed to repeat this cycle of failure, of just there's only one way to advocate for white well-being, and it's this way that's going to fail over and over and over again. This return to impotence, because you're just repeating the same thing that a bunch of people did decades ago. So those were the two main things. The world's out of line with natural laws. I love culture. I love biodiversity, as you mentioned. That's in the biospirit of our people. We love biodiversity, and when you understand these things, you recognize and you put forward the most logical position, which is it is not the assertion of race or the assertion of identity that creates racial or ethnic conflict. It is the denial of those facts that creates racial and ethnic conflict.
Yes.
You create these conflicts because you deny biological realities. You deny natural law. You can have a brother and you and your brother love each other, but you still have separate rooms so that you don't fight. It's very simple. You want to stop racial and ethnic conflict, which we do, then give each people their own home. And we had our homes and they're being destroyed. That's what going free clubs are supposed to do. So if you're in a city like I am and you're experiencing biospiritual disharmony, with a going free club, you can have that bit of sanity back. You can be in a community of Western kind that you can actually trust, and we can help you and we can teach you how to bring your family and friends so that you're not like people in the white sympathetic sphere who live in fear of their family and friends finding out that they care about our well-being, and whose only way of bringing them over to, you know, white sympathy, not white well-being, is to show them a 6-hour documentary, or, you know, getting excited when they use a racial slur. These are not displays of positive in-group preference. Dislike or hatred of
Exactly.
another group is not display of love for your own. If you had a girlfriend or a wife and she says, "Do you love me?" and you say, "Well, I really hate my ex-girlfriend," that is not "I love you." And it is the same thing with our people. So what I want to do with Go Free Clubs is, for the province of Ontario and for Canada, have an online space for internationally. So anyone, at least from my GFC, can join internationally. But we will have separate rooms for, well, one room where people can all interact, separate rooms for Canada, a separate room for Ontario, and then even more specifically for my area, so that we can start organizing people with plenty of vetting. Because when you have vetting and you have, you know, trust, you have trust that builds up because people feel safer, and that's what we need. We need to build up trust, because trust is the currency that we're going to use and that we're going to spend to build businesses, build families, you know, get young women to join us so that we can pair them up with young men, have young men go to the gym together, have people go on hikes, have them go on picnics, have them go in teams and reach out to others. Uh, for example, I think you, Jared, I remember when uh, I first saw you, I thought, this is the exact kind of guy that we need. I could take this man anywhere and no one would say anything. They would be, wow, this is such a good presenting person, good aesthetics, well
Thank you.
spoken.
People still say things. Thank you.
Well, it's true.
I mean, when you're in the anti-white narrative, as you know, one peep in the opposite direction, and all of a sudden you're the devil incarnate. But thank you.
Yeah, I mean it just gives so much validity to our positions, and to, this is what a person who cares about white well-being looks like. This is exactly the kind of person that you would want your son to associate with, your daughter to associate with, that you could bring over to, you know, someone in the family who's having a wedding. You could bring over to, you know, even a funeral, someone that you would have no problems with any member of your family meeting, and someone that you can just fully trust, you know, how they would advocate for our people. That's what we need, and that's also what we want to build with GFCs, vetting, so we can bring the best people together and regain our identity, have brotherhood, the brotherhood and sisterhood that we've been so denied. So GFCs, my approach to them is, we have an international online space, while at the same time we're building a local space for people in Ontario. So I can go and I will meet with people. I will vet them in person, spend time with them. And future members who join the GFC can have that trust and that safety and that security in knowing that whoever is alongside them, although they may not know them yet, they can trust that that is a person who is on our side, who has been vetted, who will not betray them, and who is at the very least not an anti-white subversive.
What kind of activities are you looking to do to facilitate that kind of fellowship?
At first, I think it's best to start very simple. It starts online. I believe the head of every GFC should be doing in-person meetings with that person a minimum of 2 times, if not more, however many times you need to really trust that person. Only after you have vetted those people in person and met with them should you be pairing them together and then going out as a group. But so to start off with, before you get to that phase, and it will take time, I'm not going to pretend to people that it's going to be done tomorrow. Slow and steady, because it's best for it to be thorough. So you start with online discussions. You do a call once a week, everyone gets together. You do a book club and you discuss Prometheus Rising, or you discuss Born Guilty. You go through Go Free. I think that should be mandatory. So every GFC, in my opinion, should have a book club, because you should be going through Go Free together. There are still some people who have not gone through the book. You got to go through it. This also works on the Go Free Friend principle, which is you put two people together, they're going to be able to work on removing each other's MPs and coming up with MCs. So that's very important, working through the material, because it is a practice. So every GFC should be practicing it. So book clubs, that's one activity. Online first, then you can move them in person. Weekly calls, that's one activity for everyone to get to know each other. Fitness, getting people together. I vetted one guy here from Ontario, and he said he does, he seems to be quite fit based on what he shared with me about his history. And he immediately volunteered, hey, what I can offer is I can take people to the gym with me. So health and fitness, we can go on hikes, we can go on walks, we can do cardio together in an intelligent manner. So none of this nonsense that you see in ant spheres where they all go to a park together and they take their dog and they put a mask on their dog. No joke, I've seen photos like that. And they put a mask on each other and, they're fighting around and, playing that tough guy. None of that nonsense. You're just two regular European people getting together to be fit. That's it. And then they can also go in pairs of 3, maybe even 4. There's nothing wrong about that. So health, fitness, intellectual stuff, getting together, going out for a meal, cultural activities. There's exhibits. I believe where I'm at is going to be the Van Gogh exhibit. That's perfect for us to do. All these kinds of little cultural activities and more. We can do outreach as well, doing media. I like to do, photo editing and some graphic design. I'm still an amateur at it, but having a media division for the GFC, I also think is important. All kinds of stuff is what I have in mind, and a lot more.
Yeah, that all sounds wonderful, and it goes along with something again we talk about here, and it was one of the motivating factors when I began, and it's kind of remained a frame. It's something I try to check in on, and it's that as dire as things seem, a lot of this is actually, I think people are closer to this than the general population is closer to this than a lot of us may realize, even though the anti-white programming is severe in many cases, because so much of this is implied and it was normal and natural up until quite recently. But that's not to say that we can be lax about the meme pathogens that were in media going back decades and decades. I'm not saying this is not me advocating for just turning back the clock to, I don't know, pick your favorite recent decade in the late 20th century and then everything's going to be fun. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that even with all of the meme pathogens, even with all the anti-white narrative through media and education over the last several decades, what is natural to us and feels right to us, a lot of people today, we still do all of that. It's you just add that little ingredient, that little extra layer of, well, yeah, we are enjoying this because it's our biospirit. no one had to say in like I sometimes get heat, not too much, and not really in this community here, of course, where I'm based with Jason, but sometimes I get heat because I like rock music, I make rock music. I don't apologize for the fact that I like a lot of cultural signals and things that were going on in the 60s, even though there's a lot of garbage that was tied in with that. There's just certain approaches and certain aesthetics that I respond to there. And my whole thing is rather than throw out the baby with the bathwater, I'm always fascinated with, well, what is it about British invasion rock music and and certain things, and even the getting back to nature, which yes was co-opted, and yes it went to extremes, and yeah there were crazy ideas that were baked around it. But I've had long conversations, some of them public, if you want to go look for them, that talked about this very thing that it's still, as you said earlier, Mr. V, they were expressions of that biospirit. There is a part of us that wants to commune with nature and maybe realize that the modern world was getting a little too plastic, and there was a response to that after the 1950s, after a lot of materialism and the kind of commercial explosion. Me and John had a really interesting conversation with Laura Lee about that back in March when we did our Learning in Public series. So things like that, or like I said, the British invasion, that kind of music, that kind of rock and roll music. No one had to say at the time, no one in London in 1966, they didn't look around at each other and say, "We like all this stuff because we're white." But the thing is 99% of those people were white. And, it's okay as long as this is the thing, as long as you have that boundary, like you were talking about, even siblings go to their own room. As long as you have that boundary of that healthy assertive element of this is who we are, it's an expression of who we are. You could even look at certain antecedents, like in terms of rock and roll. For me, when I'm talking about here, to me, that is an iteration of our romantic um, strand, I guess you could say is a good word, strand. There were romantic poets and painters in the 1800s and the 1700s. That style of rock and roll, to me, in a nutshell, was just an iteration of the European romantic artist. That is one flavor of our arts, and it shows itself every so often, okay? So if people were just a little more aware of that, it doesn't have to be this huge thing. You don't have to know every little nuance of history and politics. It's just owning the fact that this feels comfortable because it's us. Like you were saying, you get together, you go work out. It doesn't have to be this, you don't have to add on all these 10 other layers and dress up. It's just, if you take two people from this community who are already aware of some of these things, just being together, resonating together, knowing you have these values and that you're awake to this, that's enough. It's just a subtle shift of just recognizing it. And then in terms of what I was getting at with in certain cities and places that might remain multiracial and multicultural in some ways, it's okay. But you're in a Western city. You understand you're a spice, okay? Like you came here from another country, and yeah, if you're cool and it resonates with you and you can hang with our way of doing things, doesn't mean you can't be my friend just because you're not of European descent. But there's just an implicit understanding. You're in London. London is a Western city. More specifically, London is an English city, and that means something. That, to me, I'm only speaking for myself here, but that's kind of my ethos. As you said, I don't know if it's something Jason had said on a Going Free maybe I missed, or maybe this is what was your own, Mr. V, but let me know, because I absolutely love it. What you said a little while ago about you don't tell your wife how much you hate your ex. You tell her how much and why you love her. That's the whole, you summed it up in one sentence. I love that. I'm gonna be using that. So thank you. And that was, I guess, my take for the last few minutes on what you're doing with the Going Free clubs. It doesn't have to be, I mean, look, I love people being innovative and creative, and I'm sure we're going to see naturally a lot of innovation and creativity. When it comes to socializing and just having friends, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It doesn't have to be more complicated. It's literally just being near each other, resonating. If you're awake to this, you're going to do activities, your whole way of being. Oh, and I don't want to speak I know I've spoken long, but just to tack on one more thing to maybe add a little more clarity to people listening. When I spoke about the fact that even though there's a lot of people infected with meme pathogens of the anti-white narrative out there, but it might take a subtle shift, is that even these people who profess all these crazy anti-white ideas, I'm not saying anything new here, a lot of people have stated this already, they still go and do very white things. They go to farmers markets and they go to craft fairs, and it's all very white, that observation has been made in many different ways, but that's something to keep in mind too. It's like you want to look at what people are naturally drawn to, and if you can point out why that is, and do it, as you were saying, in an ethical way, in a well-mannered way, um, in a way that's not coming from hate towards others, just a love of your own, you're just standing firm in your boundaries, people will feel that, and from what I've seen, that's going to be the way, a reasonable way that at least someone will hear you out. They're still gonna, like a rat backed in a corner, that the meme pathogens in their brain are still gonna fight back against you at first. You might not get someone who says, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna completely change my worldview because of this one conversation." But I guarantee you that what you're talking about, what we talk about here, is far and away going to at least have the other person, your interlocutor, walk away from that conversation, even if they're secretly thinking to themselves, at least thinking, okay, this person's reasonable, or they can't write you off because they're just going to put you in a box of being this fringe person. And that's unfortunately, as you were indicating, what a lot of the internet has acquiesced to. A lot of the internet scene has fallen right into this, the path of least resistance. There was a bad guy script written for me, so that's what I'm going to go do. And I'm not saying we can't we know history's written by the winners, we know we're not told certain things, but, I don't know, you mentioned, a certain 6-hour documentary, that's, interesting, but it's not the be all and end all of everything. I can't base my entire life on watching a documentary, and who's to say that everything in that documentary is correct, That's really neither here nor there.
Precisely, and it is not what is fundamental. What is fundamental is understanding our biospirit. That is what is fundamental. It is not fundamental what your girlfriend or your wife or your boyfriend or your husband or your cousin or your mother or your father or your brother or your sister think about X group. That is not an indicator of love for our people. It is not a victory for them to display dislike or hatred for another group. It is a victory when your sister turns to you and says, I would never white a race. That's a damn victory. That is a victory. It is not a victory when your uncle uses a racial slur at Thanksgiving and you're like, yes, victory. That is not victory. It is a victory when he says, wow, Nazi is an anti-white slur. That's a victory. Thinking racially, a lot of our people who are white sympathetic have forgotten that what we're trying to do is give our people ethnocentrism, positive ethnocentrism. Look at non-white people. There's plenty of non-white people who are not politically inclined. Do they advocate for their well-being? Hell yes, they do. Most, for example, blacks are not what might be called black nationalists. Do they advocate for the interests of blacks? Are they 100% in agreement about the fundamentals of the interests of blacks? Of course they are. That's what we're
Yeah,
trying to do
it's
for
just
our people.
natural. Exactly.
Exactly.
It's just
And
natural.
yeah, and that is what our guys have forgotten. Get back to basics. That is what matters. And that's what Going Free does. We have been deracinated. Our ethnocentrism has been destroyed. Someone that I'm working with on a project, a very white positive project, I might add, he said that it's kind of like it white guilt is like an autoimmune disease. And yeah, that's basically it. You're white guilt, anti-whiteism, it's eating us from the inside. That's what we have to remove so that we can function like a healthy being. Like Jason says all the time, if there was an animal that hated itself or that was going against its own kind out in nature, we would observe that maybe it has been infected with some kind of parasite. Something is going on that is ruining that animal. And it's the same thing with us. Only displays of love are indicators that someone is going in the right way. Only that. And it's precisely as you said, Jared. For a lot of people, it's just mentioning the little things, like making them conscious of it. Because for other races, it's always made explicit. If Mozart was of any non-European race, you would hear about it all the time. How many times do you hear them tell you that Mozart or Chopin or Giuseppe Verdi or any of our greats are members of Western kind? How many times is it racialized? Rarely. So it's just making people aware, like exactly like you said, hey, this has its origins in Western kind. This thing that you take for granted, this water that you swim in, totally unaware of, that is Western kind. That is the biospirit that you take for granted.
Yeah, I know. It's the whole what we said in the beginning, you don't know what you have till it's gone syndrome. I don't wish harm on anyone, of course, naturally. But sometimes you have to laugh when you see these memes of you should take people who profess a certain worldview. It'd be really interesting to somehow strap like a camera that you can't take off. I don't know, some kind of like lightweight but technology where there's just a camera strapped to them to their forehead, or maybe like a micro camera on them, and all right, put your money where your mouth is, baby. We're gonna put you for a few weeks in a totally non-white environment, not the Hilton, not a Western enclave in the middle of a non-white culture. You're gonna go off the reservation, and you say you don't, white people stole things and oh, they're so oppressive, it's so terrible. All right, let's do some reality TV. Let's put you in the middle of a really, really non-white area and let's see how you like it. That I almost wish if there's a way to do that, but you had security around or I don't know, Navy SEALs, so that if the person was about to get attacked, they'd be saved at the last minute. Because again, I would never, ever, ever advocate for someone being put in harm's way. So this is more of a hypothetical, but I think you understand what I'm saying. It's just my dramatic way of saying you don't know what you have until it's gone, and more people have to realize this. But that is unfortunately happening, and we're going through a bottleneck right now, and we have a way here and a great community of making it through that together and coming out the other end better. So I see you nodding, Jason. Do we have in the last minutes any questions or comments from the chat?
We do, and just a couple. And if you have any, folks, get them in really quickly, because we're going to speak to two financial gifts, and then we're going to get Mr. V's info once again, where you can find him, and we're going to be tapping out at that point. But this has been really a marvelous exploration of Mr. V's, some of his roots, stalk, and flowers now of the great work he's doing in service to white well-being. We are very excited about that. We draw the absolute best dedicated, mature, loving people who are and are going to make a difference in the world for white well-being. We are recapturing our destiny. We're going to put an end to this anti-whiteism, and we are the ones who are going to wield the pen when we outline who and what we are, and how we behave, and how we are courageous, and how we can be wrathful when the anti-whites wish to victimize us, how we are willing to draw a line in the sand and not let them go another inch. The anti-white narrative would have you believe that you can only be manly if you act like a monster to resist them. Well, that is hogwash. We decide what manly is. The good, the noble, the heroic, the virtuous of Western kind. We are the ones who decide what our resistance will look like, what our victory will look like. So let's jump on over and let's get a big round of applause for both Mr. V and Jared, because it was Jared's calm, cool, intellectual questioning in this interview, that style that undoubtedly brought out some of the best of Mr. V. And I was so very interested to be learning more about Mr. V as well, already known to be a true champion in service to white well-being. We're going to start right off with Mrs. Jess Horse. Ladies and gentlemen, get your raucous emojis out for Mrs. Jess Horse, because she just financially gifted $25. Thank you so much, sister. We really appreciate it. And with that $25, she gives us 3 white heart emojis. And we also have here financially gifting JK160. Thank you so very much. He gifts $10. Thank you. And writes, been listening to a lot of Jared's music, looking forward to more. Well, he's going to be making more. Nothing's going to stop him. Jared's, as you all know, Jared is primarily a musician. So
I've been working on the new song. Yeah. Just earlier today.
Well, great. We're multifaceted, as you know, ladies and gentlemen, and we're building culture, genuine culture of our own design once again, which as we build it, and when I say of our own design, what I'm saying here is that it's really coming increasingly through the pristine environment for our biospirit that we create in service to white well-being, rather than through the muck of villainy, of the antagonistic role that the anti-whites inflict on us. And so therefore the mean pathogens, the white noir, these tropes that the folks think they have to embrace and then project into their artistic works. So as we create that, though, and with the work we're doing here and the way we do it in service to white well-being, we will speak in a harmonious way to the biospirit of our people around the world. And then they'll have an option. Then finally, where do I go? Are they going to be drawn toward where they feel that harmony, where they feel that connection? Of course. Are they going to be repelled by what is supposedly supposed to be of us, but is at some way discordant, disharmonious? Yes, they will be repelled from that. So we need to only continue on the path that we are on and be virtuous enough and brave enough to draw our own line in the sand, and even with our sick brothers and sisters with their mean pathogens, and say, you're going to have to get better. I'm not going to meet you halfway to sickness. I'm going to pull you all the way to health. We just had Johnny Appleseed financially gift $10. Thank you so much, brother. And he writes here, how may we join a going free club? Well, that is a fantastic question. You should come back tomorrow. We're going to have Mr. V answer that for his particular going free club, but you can also start one, and we can speak to this more tomorrow on Sunday. And I am indeed, now that I have, and we'll be talking about it tomorrow, going down and visiting Mama Fraulein Dresden, and that just went beautifully, as you can imagine. Now that we've done that, we have more time, and we'll be able to make some clips specifically dedicated to the creation of a going free club and the outline, how it's supposed to work. And I will pass this question over to Mr. V. How do we join a going free club, specifically his club up there in Canada? And Mr. V, if you could please, after you answer that question, please tell folks where they can find you. And I guess we'll be seeing you next on another call on Going Free. But that information and any final words you may have, I pass it to you.
Thank you, brother. And it's been a pleasure to be on. Thank you both. I really appreciate it. It's a true honor. That being said, to join a GFC, my suggestion would be look for people within the Going Free community, people that you know and you trust who are currently starting a GFC. So I'll name out a couple of people: Anglo-America, Patrick Sutton, Lycomedes, Iberian writer, Raymond Foster, if I'm not mistaken. Yiz may also be starting one. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I'm going to be reaching out to as many people as I can so that different GFCs can coordinate. For example, I had a gentleman from California reach out to me, and then I found out that there is a GFC in California, and that's Patrick Sutton's GFC. So I sent him to them. So that's a great thing that we can do. We can send applicants to each other so that we're getting people in the GFC that is most local to them. Now, some GFCs are going to be very different. Some will take people internationally, like I do. I don't mind where you are from. You can join the online version. That being said, I cannot vet you in person. So that's different. In the future, if you go through my vetting and you join my GFC, what I can do later is talk to someone else. If you find out that there is a GFC in your area now and you want to join that, I can give you a sort of letter of recommendation, if you will. So that is something that we can do. We can coordinate. But at first, look for people in the Going Free community that you know and that you trust. Keep up with the Going Free streams on Sunday. We'll do our best to keep people updated on what's going on with GFCs, what GFC is in what area, so that you know. If you don't know if there's a GFC in your area, you can contact me at gofreeclub@protonmail.com, and I'll do my best to find out if there is one. That's also where you can apply to my GFC, is gofreeclub@protonmail.com. Message me there. I'll instruct you on what app to download. Once you download that app, which is an encrypted app, we'll take you through a series of questions, and we'll then take you through vetting calls. It's a process that takes some time, but I believe it's safest. It'll be safer for you because everyone else that's in the GFC has undergone the same process that you have, and it's something that, regardless of who it is, regardless of how well known they may be in the Going Free community, a process that everyone will undertake. It's really important for our security, for our safety. We live in an anti-white regime. We've got to be serious about vetting and who we're attracting. So if you're willing to go through the vetting process, I think that in itself says a lot about you. It says that you're willing to respect everyone. You're willing to, have some OPSEC. You want a safe environment, and you want something that attracts serious people who are willing to do work. You also get to determine your level of involvement, right? So if you just want to join in for online meetings, online gatherings, the online book club, the media division, online projects, which I do want us to do, and I do plan on that. That's a great way to bond people, especially for men. Men bond by doing together. For women, I'm planning more social time, if you will, and I do believe it's also important to give women in the GFC their own area, men their own area, so that they can discuss these things. But then, of course, an area in between where everyone can gather. Everyone of every religion is accepted, of course. But yes, you get to determine your level of involvement. So if you don't want to be super involved in projects, you don't have to be, but you do have to be going free and be in the practice. That's a must. So, is there any other questions or anything else that you think we should address, brother, about the Go Free clubs?
You did a magnificent job today. We're absolutely going to have you back to talk more about it and explore more of your thoughts, brother, on everything that is going on, and specifically how we can move forward with the Going Free clubs and make a real change. A place that, folks, if you are unaware about the GFC's Going Free clubs, is something that is introduced per the program. And I think it ends up being just coincidentally right at the right time. So the environments where you can build community, you can have that community, you're going to be speaking, and it can be of various types. Going Free clubs, there are no restrictions on, I guess, the community type of interaction or building. Everything has to be done according to the practice of going free. That's the big difference. And if it is done so, then it is recognized as a legitimate going free club. And in the future, increasingly, that will mean assistance, etc., from the organizational entity. So it can be something as simple as young men getting together, and maybe they're all into gaming, and it's something online, for example. And but it's a place where they get together, where they are talking about everything, using the lexicon and dialectics that are the concepts that are the basis for our own story. It makes it inescapably the case. And therefore, by doing so, they're strengthening themselves and attending to those mean pathogen infections. And they can also they'll strengthen each other with that growth. And also by teaching each other, they will grow stronger and faster, and they'll have opportunities as they build community to get together and to spread. Now, getting together can be virtually, it can be in person, to help to promulgate, because we have to promulgate the concepts to change the world. And we are changing the world with this practice, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you so much, Mr. V. It's magnificent. We're going to have you back. And of course, any day you want to call on any Going Free, and we'll have you in. Mr. George, your final thoughts and where folks can find you.
Well, I just want to reiterate what both of you said. This has been a really great conversation, Mr. V. I enjoyed going back and forth with you and learning a little bit more about your story and how you did it in your own style. Really enjoyed it today. So thank you so much, and look forward to seeing how all this develops. My site is thegreatorder.com. As I said, new song in the works. So we'll be hearing about that and hearing it at some point relatively soon. And I wish you all a wonderful rest of the weekend. And I hope you're enjoying Christmas, Yuletide times. Hopefully we'll have some more cozy shows in the next couple of weeks to reflect the time of year. Maybe some of you will come on and join us. We'd love that. But be well until next we speak.
Thank you, good brother. And indeed, a Merry Christmas and Happy Yule to every single one of you out there. We have, in the closing seconds before we tap out, the Flora financially gifting $5. Thank you so much, Flora. And writes here, great synergy on your after party segments. You and Mr. George complement each other very well. Well, we really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And then Flora back again, this time with $10. And writes here, Mr. George, your music is fabulous. What's in us is awesome. We'll let Jared speak to that quickly.
I'll just say thank you. I'm glad, and share it around if you think you know other people who would like it.
Thank you so much for that, Flora. That's a wonderful thing to say. It absolutely, I concur 100%. It's a magnificent song. Please share these things, folks. We have to be, as Mr. George says, we have to be the algorithm, because YouTube, the anti-whites at YouTube and Odysee and all these, they got their hands around our throats, because this is what's changing the world. We are what's changing the world. And they don't like that. Sometimes people don't necessarily need to be anti-white even at all. They just change, and a new world and a sun rising in the West is something that unsettles them, and they want to push back against it. But we are not going to be appeased. We are not going to be stymied. We're going to make our way over that mountain, and we're going to hoist that sun into the sky. I want to give a big thank you to Fornell being here and moderating. He is a champion of so many talents. This is a man, can you imagine? This is like having, well, my gosh, we can think of so many names, right? I can think of so many names right now of different leaders over the years who have had many different talents, and they were perfectly placed. And this is like, well, I guess I could just, instead of naming a bunch of different belts, say, generally speaking, if the CEO of the company is actually worth what he makes, if he actually knows about all the different departments and he knows how things run, and he can make magic happen, and yet he shows up at the end of the day to help people clean up the office space or fix some little error on their computer or some Word document that they just was confusing them. That's like Fornell coming down from his magical skills and talents and time to moderate here. And so we deeply appreciate that. A big round of applause for Noel. And we have Promethean Healing saying, thank you, No White Guilt, thank you for having superhuman backbone for all these years, good brother. Well, that is very kind of you, and I really appreciate that. On that note, passing deserved compliments, I shall say, for all of us. We always applaud each other for the good work that we do in service to white well-being, because there is no stage. There is only a field on which we struggle for our very well-being, and we are all players in that, shoulder to shoulder, supporting each other, helping each other, and together we're going to get there. We look forward to seeing you again.